Take Command podcast. Let's hit a mailback question before we get out of here, Logan. Obviously, we'll do a ton more draft stuff from Indy, and then before you know it, like right after Indy, we got to go full bore into free agency. Yeah. So we got some really cool and interesting salary cap questions. We'll tackle those either next week. We might skip a mailbag next week because we'll have so much to recap from the combine, but we'll get to that question before free agency for sure. But this one was a good one from Sadiq heading into the week. I've recently heard rumors about Washington going after a linebacker like Jer'Zhan Campbell in the draft or one in free agency. I love when we get I've heard rumors. Oh, you mean there's been mock drafts that have been going there? Sorry, that was. I mean,
snappy, he might have some inside baseball.
I don't know, Sadiq. If you got any more inside information, you let us know.
Yeah, right.
But I do think it brings up, he then goes on to what is, I think, an interesting question. If this happened, do you think Joe Whitt Jr. would shift the defense to a 3-4 base? Assuming Wagner and Campbell are your inside linebackers, I think this would be interesting considering Luvu's success as a blitzer rusher. Only question I have is what would happen to Mikey's prospects of going back to nickel. I'd imagine he'd stay outside in a 3-4 base. Would also wonder if we have the D-line personnel to make a 3-4 work. So, Logan, back in the day, people used to send in questions like this all the time, like before we had a podcast. But when I was doing radio shows during when Ryan was here, and it always felt like in that day it was a 3-4 going to a 4-3, and it kind of felt like that would have actually been a smart move, that they actually had the personnel in a lot of those years to shift to a 4-3, and they just kept hiring 3-4 coordinators, and then they finally make the switch under Ron to a 4-down front, and now we got the reverse. This is, I think, part of football fandom. People are always looking for different ways to go about it, but I think I think it's an interesting question. One, because clearly fans want to know, but two, they play a lot of odd fronts anyway. So just real quick to set that up, an odd front means you have an odd number of guys with their hand in the dirt, so typically 3 down, or you can also define it as guys on line of scrimmage. So last year they have 3 guys down, and then Frankie and Dante typically were the 2 guys that were playing edge, and it kind of looks like a 3-4, except for the other inside linebacker besides Bobby was Jeremy Chin. And thus, it's not really a 3-4 base because by personnel, it's nickel because there's 5 defensive backs on the field. Long-winded setup to say they have some of this structure already in. Then what do we do with that information?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. Like that's a really interesting question. Like just like what are the advantages of moving to a 3-4? Like just because you draft Jer'Zhan Campbell, you think he's better on the line. Like Frankie Luvu is pretty good on the line too, but I think it just depends on what you want to do. And I think there's no, that's the thing about football and coaching football, and that I've been really grateful to the high school for teaching me, is that scheme is important, but it's not the main thing. It's about making sure the guys feel comfortable and confident with what you're calling, right? So obviously you want to call a system that fits your personnel, right? Like if you think Jer'Zhan Campbell's an outside 3-4 linebacker and he's going to stand up off the ball.
Right. And just to be clear, this question said, looks at Jer'Zhan Campbell as a 3-4 like Mo linebacker, another off ball. I think you agree with this. I think he's going to wind up as an edge player. So just for the draft component of this, I think Campbell probably winds up being an edge player, not an off-ball linebacker, or at the very least a hybrid role like Frankie.
Yeah.
So separating that part of the Campbell evaluation from the structure part of the question.
Yeah, so maybe if you're drafting Schlesinger from UCLA, who's a true off-the-ball, dyed-in-the-wool guy, again, you want to get your best personnel on the field, and I think you alluded to that really well there. They have an odd structure base or nickel defense that's odd, right? So you have 3 down linemen, you have Frankie, you have whoever's on the other side, Armstrong, you have Bobby in the middle with Jeremy Chin. If I'm an offensive coordinator and I'm calling that, I'm saying, hey, this is odd structure. 11's a linebacker. That's how we're going to call this. And we need to get that communicated from the center. So you could easily say, oh, hey, here's Schlesinger plus Bobby plus these 2 guys on the edge. And we still have the odd component to this structure, right? It just
depends. And by the way, Jordan McGee's already in-house, so maybe he's your guy.
Yeah, right. It doesn't matter. And I think it's just what is the advantage of doing that? It gets you a little bit faster. It'll let you do some more fire zone stuff. And so when I say fire zone, right? So the great thing about an odd structure is you're kind of perfectly balanced because of the 4 linebackers. So I could bring, let's say I'm from the offensive perspective, I'm bringing the left linebacker. I stunt the 3 interior guys. Then I can drop Frankie out, who's on the right side. and I'm not short in coverage. I've made it hard to identify who the actual rushers are, and that's the benefit of a 3-4, right? The problem with a 3-4 is that usually you have big kind of hulking pass rushing defensive ends that set hard edges in the run game, and you actually lose people in coverage. So like, the Philadelphia Eagles a couple of years ago, the Washington Commanders when I was here, right? You lose, everyone thinks it adds athleticism, but you're actually losing athleticism because on first, second down, those guys are more like defensive ends. And then in subs, so when you move to 4 down on 3rd down, like you get, like those guys move to defensive end, you get more pass rushers on the field to bring nickel in. So people get caught up in this all the time. Basically, long and short of it is like 3-4, 4-3, which is better. They're both good. They both have their pros and cons. Personnel obviously would drive some of these decisions. And I think you hit the nail on the head when we started talking about it, is they have both in the bag. It just depends on how you feel like Jihad Campbell or Schlesinger or McGee is best utilized and best maximizes the other guys in the defense, right? So to me, it's a good question from a philosophical standpoint, but to me, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So like, for example, if your best 7 are 4D linemen and 3 linebackers, play a 4-3. If your best 7 are 3D linemen and 4 linebackers, play a 3-4, right? Like that's really what it comes down to, because you have to coach some different things. You have to talk through run fits. It becomes a little bit more complicated in some coverage structures, but that's with both of them, right? And so just making sure you feel good about it is ultimately the crux of this question.
Right. So a couple of other things that I think are worth clarifying here. When we say the term 3-4 base, that is not interchangeable truly if we're using football terminology with a 3-4 structure, right? So what we just talked about in a lot of ways is a 3-4 structure, aka the odd structure, right? So you have 3 down linemen or 5 guys across the line and some kind of odd number versus a 4 down structure. But base implies that there are 4 defensive backs on the field. Like base is a term that means no matter what the structure of the front is, there are 4 DBs on the field. And the idea that Dan Quinn and Joe Whitt Jr. are going to go to a 3-4 base, no, that is not going to happen. That is not how their defense is built. But as we just talked about, within a nickel package, they have an odd structure. So I know that's a lot of like really wonky terminology, and hopefully we didn't lose anybody, but it's worth pointing out, like a 3-4 base where there are 4 defensive backs on the field, because that gets to the Mikey part of the question. Yeah. What does that mean about him going inside or outside? You could have him play inside when nickel is on the field, outside when your base is on the field. That's all possible. But Dan forever and Joe forever and all the defenses, as far as I know that he's been in, they are a 4 down team in base, but they also don't really play a ton of base. And in fact, they play really, really light personnel, and that's kind of been the criticism for them over the years in some of the run stuff, especially in Dallas, more so than this year, is, Chin was good enough against the run that people were like, oh, the problems are elsewhere for the Washington run defense. In Dallas, it were guys like Donovan Wilson, these hybrid safety linebackers, big enough to do it, and could they do it effectively enough? And they also had some smaller guys inside. So, hopefully I just made things clear, not more confusing, but I think that's worth pointing out, and also gets to the Mikey part of the question.
Yeah, so I think that's the other thing to just point out here is like the more personnel you have, the more flexibility you have. And I think that's ultimately what you're trying to do, right?
Right.
You're trying to say like in nickel, we want better coverage players. So I don't think that really affects Mikey's role. If he is going to play nickel, right? He's going to be on the field. If it's an obvious passing situation, they come out through wide receivers. I want to make sure that there's 2 linebackers who are kind of run players. We got 4 defensive linemen who are run players. We got our nickel player who is a hybrid of both of those things. He's a run and a coverage player. That's Mikey. And then we've got the 4 coverage players on the perimeter. So the 2 outside corners and the 2 safeties, right? I'm not going to match with my base defense to 3 wide receivers very often, right? And if I am, then it's a mismatch. That's the whole reason you go to nickel, right? So I think understanding what the offense is trying to do with its different personnel. So if we go through wide receivers, we're probably going to pass, right? I'm going to bring Mikey on the field. If we go to 2 tight ends, like we might run it. So we're going to bring 3 linebackers on the field. Like those are the types of decisions that you make. And again, like when you draft a linebacker, to me, I think the question was interesting, not from like a schematic standpoint, but I think it's a good roster building perspective. Yes. Because you're basically saying like, as Bobby's getting older, we have this young player who's got a lot of athletic upside that is going to play good football, win, or has a longer runway than Bobby Wagner. He's like the heir apparent to Bobby Wagner. It could be Jordan McGee, whatever you want. To me, that's where the question becomes more interesting in terms of personnel flexibility within the front. Like you are reacting to the offense. And I think that's important to understand. And everyone's got their role. Like Jeremy Chin, we just talked about how he's kind of the Buffalo nickel or the big nickel. Like he might come out in 12 personnel because you want a little bit more athletic person to match up with the tight end, right? But that's where, again, having different people, think of it as like different pitches if you're a pitcher, different different answers, different solutions based on personnel. And so that's where, again, like they're not going to change anything because they draft somebody. They're going to kind of fit him in and find how best to use him in these multiple defensive structures we just talked about.
Yeah, and two other things that I'll just add real quick to address there's a lot of parts to this question. We've talked, you said, I think this would be interesting considering Luvu's success as a blitzer rusher. And one thing that I want to underscore that we've talked about before, and people, if you missed this, you can go back and listen to all our previous podcasts. It's in there somewhere. But like Frankie had more success as a blitzer than a rusher. Like the times that he was lined up on the edge as one of these true edge players and told like, hey, go rush, whether that's in a 4-down nickel situation or in some of these odd structures, that wasn't as effective as him coming as an off-ball linebacker, timing it up and flying in. So like him rushing one-on-one against a tackle or even a guard or whoever, like just didn't have the success that I think they had hoped for. And who knows, maybe he gets better at it next year. I'm not saying it's a dead package, but I think it's worth pointing out. And then the last part is would also wonder if we have the defensive line personnel to make a 3-4 work. And I would say not currently because you need these big, like you need John Allen types to play end in the 3-4, and you need a nose tackle. And they don't have really either of those because John is more effective as a 3 technique, not as a 3-down end. And then they don't have the nose tackle.
Yeah, and that's kind of, and we're going to get, I'm going to do it. We're getting in the weeds here for a second. So like 3-4, right? So imagine your offensive lineman, you got a true nose, like head up nose over the center.
Right, so their helmets are even center and nose tackle.
Head up nose over the center. You got head up players over both offensive tackles, right? That's a true 3-4, like traditional Pittsburgh Steelers back in like the late 90s, early 2000s spacing. Those guys are big dudes. They're 2-gapping. They're filling up those runs to let those linebackers kind of make plays. And think Ray Lewis with Tony Saragusa in the front and those big dudes in the front, right? They're not really playmaking people. They're eating up blocks, right? That's your traditional 3-4. Now, people will come out with 3-4 personnel and just take those 3 guys who are head up on the center, head up on the tackles, and just shift them one way or another. So you're shifting to like a shade. So a shade is someone who's playing on the shoulder of the center as opposed to head up. You're shifting the 4-eye to a 5 technique, so like basically in the gap between the tackle and the tight end, and the backside 4-eye to a 3 technique, so in between the guard and the tackle. So now all of a sudden you've basically taken this odd spacing and made even spacing. So that's the spacing you'd be in if you had a 4-down front, right? But you have odd personnel. So like you could do something like that with the people here. And again, it still works. Like think about the Dallas Cowboys back in, 2010 to 2015 with DeMarcus Ware and Hatcher and all these different pieces there. They didn't really have a true nose. So they were like, shoot, we'll keep our same spacing, right? We're just going to shift it over and play a 4-down spacing in the front, right? And have DeMarcus Ware be a stand-up outside linebacker and the other guy be a rush end. And that's what you can do. So we could do, technically, the Commanders, with the personnel we currently have, could do something like that, but it still is going to be like 4-down stuff. And I think that's where the technical kind of gray area of this question like comes in. It's like, you're not going to play a Pittsburgh 3-4 with anybody on this roster at the moment, but you could do something like that where you're classifying Dorrance Armstrong as like a stand-up outside backer and then Fowler as a rush end, which again, they're doing versions of that already. We're just moving pieces slightly to help with run fits, help with matchups, whatever we're doing. And again, that type of subtle shifting I think is very valuable because it's a pain in the butt for offensives to get it targeted.
Right. That's when you're getting into like these over fronts and under fronts.
Yes,
and like, is it really a 4-3? Is it a 3-4? Yes. Like, okay, that's actually a 4-3 over front. It's just one guy's extras standing up instead of having his hand in the dirt, even though he's in the exact same spot. So now we call it something totally different.
And it affects the protection calls, it affects the run calls, it affects the combinations. And so again, they could easily do something like that. But again,
and they do some of that.
Yeah, and that's not like personnel based necessarily. I mean, it is personnel based, but it's like it wouldn't be affected if they drafted somebody new necessarily. They might get into more of that, but they're not going to change defensive philosophy for one piece unless it's like a total baller maybe. But even then, like they're probably
if they go trade for Myles Garrett and they want to invent something new, great. If they go sign Micah Parsons next offseason because the Cowboys screw up that contract somehow, great. but a rookie probably not going to redo everything. So I hope we answered the question, Sadiq. We probably more than answer. It's one of those where you submit the question, and you expect a short answer, and we just wrote an essay.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, because it's so the answer so basically the answer to the question is they're probably not going to change everything for
the answer, Sadiq, is no.
There's no is really the answer. That's the answer. That's what we're getting at. It's been a long day. It's no is the answer.
No is the answer. More of your mailbag questions get answered in varying lengths of brevity next week on the show. In the meantime, we'll see you. I believe the plan is Wednesday with Trevor Sikkema. It's Combine Week. Things are subject to change. Who knows? And then hopefully I think we're gonna be able to pull off the training pod after all. In a shocking turn of events, Logan, I think I messed up my calendar. I think we have more of. We don't have to quite thread such a tight needle on Thursday. I can't even say that phrase.
I don't believe it. I won't believe it till I see it. How about that? We'll see.
Yeah. If I see you in Indianapolis, not in the airport, then we'll believe it. But I think we're gonna be able to pull this off on Thursday. But as I said earlier in the show, that's why you subscribe. That's why you stay tuned. We'll see you when we see you. And we'll be talking football here on Take Command, and it'll be soon. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.